You're listening to the Exceptional Girls Podcast, and I'm your host, Julie Withrow. As a mom who raised a twice exceptional young daughter, I know both the joys and the challenges of parenting a child who thinks, learns, and experiences the world differently. I also know how lonely it can feel and how long it can take to get answers. I created this podcast to increase awareness, understanding, and acceptance of female neurodivergence. In doing so, I hope to smooth the path for other families. Please join me for expert interviews and candid conversations about giftedness, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, and more. Let's learn together how we can make sure our exceptional girls feel seen, supported, and celebrated. If you've ever found yourself wishing your child could just sit still to focus, pay attention, or learn, this conversation may change the way you think about movement. In this episode of the Exceptional Girls Podcast, I'm joined by Katherine Connolly. Katherine is a licensed clinical counselor who specializes in supporting neurodivergent children and their families. Drawing from both her professional expertise and her own lived experience as an autistic and ADHD adult, she helps families better understand how neurodivergent kids experience and interact with the world. In this conversation, Katherine explains why a child's need for movement isn't a behavior that needs to be fixed. And it can be an important tool that helps many neurodivergent children regulate their nervous systems, sustain attention, and become available to learn. She shares practical ways the families can incorporate movement into everyday life, how to navigate the challenge of raising a child who's always on the go, and strategies for advocating for movement at school. If you've ever wondered whether trying to get your child to sit still is helping them or holding them back, my hope is that this conversation gives you a new perspective on movement and greater confidence in supporting your child's individual needs. Hi, Katherine, and welcome to the Exceptional Girls Podcast. I'm really excited to have you here today. And we're going to be talking about movement, which I feel like is going to be a really good topic for a lot of our listeners, especially as our kids go back to school. But again, welcome and thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and dive right into to our conversation. One of the things I wanted to talk about right up front is that I feel like many of us were raised to believe that, our job as the adults or the parents is to help our children sit still, right? And teach them how to pay attention and encourage them to focus. But when it comes to movement, I know you see things a little bit differently, especially as it relates to neurodivergent kids. So can you share more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'll also kind of start on a personal note and then I'll share some interesting studies. So as a somatic practitioner, movement is a big part of my work and has always been a big part of my life. As a child, I was the child who never stopped moving. My grandmother told my mom when I was very young, she's like, I don't know what to do. I would do laps around our house. So from my experience, looking back, I see a few different things. I see one, an ADHD child who just needed that movement, right? To help regulate my nervous system, but also it was a way to express energy that was bottled within my body. And so the way that I look at that energy is not just physical energy, so like needing to move, but that emotional energy that's feeling trapped in the nervous system. So needing to release that in order to, as we call it, regulate. So I think it's really interesting because we can approach it from a few different perspectives. And there have been many studies that show how important movement is to help children be able to learn to quote unquote regulate their emotions and to be able to really just be present in their experiences. So there was one in 2018 where it was talking about how 10 minutes of walking significantly improved math problem solving skills. And so if we look at overlapping areas in the brain, so like the frontal lobe, the cerebellum, and the basal ganglia, they're working together to solve motor movement and also more cognitive problems. And so there are several pieces involved. And so if we're just asking our children, stay still and focus, not only is it not developmentally like appropriate, but it's also not working with our biology. And that's a big part of my work.
Yeah, well, and I think it's an important. I mean, all of this is so important to understand, right? Because I think so often we look at a kid who's like constantly moving around, who is hyperactive, I'm kind of doing air quotes, right, as this problem to solve, right? Like, how do we get this kid to sit still and relax or whatever, right? Because it's, it's disruptive or it's causing us stress to watch it. But if we can really shift our thinking about that, right, that's kind of the first step. If we can agree with that, right, and we start to look at movement as a tool, right, versus this problem that we got to fix, maybe it's a tool that we can use to support our kids, right? So if we think about it that way, what are some ways that families can intentionally use movement to support their child?
Yeah, so I think you hit it right on the head. It's not a problem, but rather how can we use it in a supportive way? And so when we look at early development, like we innately rock our babies, right? So that this innate sort of movement helps to soothe the nervous system. And we need that actually to develop interoception, so awareness of our internal physiological cues. And for it ties a little into the neuroception, so our understanding of safety. So the rocking is used to, one, calm the nervous system, but also to help us be able to um, sort of come at it from the other way. So we can work with it from the inside out or from the outside in. So with sensitive and neurodivergent children and people in particular, I tend to see either a hyper sensitivity to what's going on in the body or hyposensitivity. So there's a lack of awareness. And so that can show up for a couple different reasons, and we can always talk about that in a bit. But being able to sort of alternate and use both. So how can we sort of bring awareness to the body by using either movement or touch? I'm doing the Havening touch right now. To then notice, okay, how is this affecting my physiological state? So is it helping me to feel calm or more activated? And how can I use a movement pattern or touch, some sort of kinetic stimulation to calm my nervous system? And it's different for everybody.
I think you bring up something really important that was in there, and that's about that neurodivergence, and I think people are starting to say this more and more and agree with it, is really a sensitivity, like a heightened sensitivity to maybe lots of different potential stimuli, right? Um, and also, so as part of that, just understanding the nervous system connection with that and emotional regulation and things. I just think there's a lot in there, right? So I want to make sure that that everybody picks up on that's really kind of the root of a lot of this, right? Is understanding those connections.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you're saying, with the highly sensitive nervous system, which really that's what it is. And if we look at a variety of presentations of neurodiversity or neurodivergence, that's what we see, right? It's expressed or it's presented in different ways. And even if you have 2 individuals or 10 individuals with the same diagnosis, it presents differently, right? So peeling back to the nervous system, and this is why I work with the reflexes, along with a bunch of other movement patterns in my somatic work, we can really help to support individuals at the root and look at, okay, where is their development? Where are they potentially missing integration in their development? Right. And then sort of working with that along with their sensory triggers and supports. So really, taking a very holistic picture is very important.
Yeah. Well, so I know that there will be some listeners who were drawn to this particular episode because they have a kid who's always in motion, right? And I know they're probably listening going, oh yeah, I get it. I mean, I guess I understand that motion, and movement is important for my kid, but my kid literally stops, like never stops, right? Like it's a lot for me to get my head around, right? Or it's a lot for me to manage.
Yeah.
And I know that's part of what we're trying to shift. But can you talk a little bit more about how you help families kind of make that shift? And what are some of the practical ways that they can support their child without it feeling like they have to reorganize their entire household or family around it? Like, how can they integrate this in a practical way that's realistic?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also have a child who has a tendency to not stop moving. So I get this also as a parent. And I also appreciate how activating it can be to watch as a parent, because on some level, you know that my child is moving a lot, they're anxious, right? And that, because we co regulate and we can't help but co regulate, we're going to feel that. So I think there's a couple things that we can do to support ourselves here. One, as the parent, we can't expect our child to change. So learning to anchor in to our body and into the present so that we can respond from a calm space as much as possible. And this takes practice. It's not like all of a sudden we can do it. It's building a muscle. So there's that aspect. And then also, like I was alluding to, leaning into our biology. So when we look at the sympathetic, which is the activated aspect of our nervous system, and we need both the parasympathetic, that rest, digest, connect, and the sympathetic. What sort of presentation of that is your child leaning into? So we have four. We have the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So fight is either verbal or physical sort of aggression. And then we have our flight, which is moving or even just like a subtle backing away. It can look like running, that constant motion of shaking, or even dissociation, right? Sort of that glazing over. That kind of brings us a little into freeze. Freeze is more the shutdown where we are done, right? We have nothing left, and that's more associated with burnout. And then fawn is the people pleasing, the playing small, the doing whatever we can to harmonize in our environment to make sure everyone else is okay. So what we're typically seeing here with a child in motion is more of that flight response. So if you notice your child maybe shaking, maybe you see that their legs are nonstop moving, let's go out for a walk. Let's do some jumping jacks. How can we actually move and work with this presentation or this, what's going on in your body right now, and make it fun, right? Like, we don't want to be shaming them because they're probably getting that everywhere. But how can we work with it? Stimming is another great example, right? We see children either orally or with their hands. I mean, there's so many different ways you can stim. But again, like, how can we kind of lean into that? Tapping, So something that I'll do with children is very often they'll start fast. Great, so let's match our heart rate. Now let's see what happens when we slow it down. And as we do that, the breath and the heart rate co-regulate. So using what they're already doing to your advantage makes it easy and a lot more fun, and as I mentioned, reduces shame.
You know, I really like that biofeedback technique you just used. And I know if people are listening, they couldn't totally see that, but you were tapping your chest, right? First fast and then slowing it down. You know, it's that you kind of you have that, you know, connection right between your body and what's going on in there. And yeah, and I love that. You know, I think something else about what you mentioned is worth talking about for a minute, and that's that I think when we think about these about kids who are always in motion, we kind of gravitate towards this ADHD type of you know, child or diagnosis or wanting to label it, right? But you also talked about stimming, which is more of an autistic trait. And yeah, I just think it's worth talking a little bit about that, right? That, you know, we can get kind of hung up on labels and what helps make the behavior understandable or not, and you know, all of these things. But at the end of the day, it's just kind of part of the neurodiversity, right, of being human, yeah, and that whatever your child needs, you know, diagnoses or not, right? Just tune into that and be accepting and understanding of it, right? I think that's, I mean, that seems to me like the heart of a lot of the work that you do and what we're talking about,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. So I mean, you and I kind of talked about this before, but with the sensitive individual, however they're diagnosed, or not, um, they're picking up on more than sort of what we're perceiving with our senses. And I think that is really important to understand. So, I mean, we look at our basic senses, sort of the sight, sound, the scent, etc., and touch. That's amplified for them. So all of those basic senses are amplified, first of all. Actually, sorry, I correct myself. Not all of them
Right,
necessarily. Likely one or two are
right.
amplified for them, at least one or two. And then there's those subtle senses that many neurotypical, I'll say, people don't perceive. If the child has also experienced trauma, and I'm not saying this to put on parents at all, but there's different types of trauma. There's big T, like a car accident, a single major event. Then there's chronic smaller T trauma, which can be things like multitasking, or all of our senses are constantly bombarded. Um, then our nervous system is constantly heightened. And so that's why I go back to working with the nervous system, right? So I think it's really important to understand that they are perceiving way more than most people give them credit for. So those unspoken, um, energetic interactions, going into a room, feeling it all. Maybe they have a gift, and I'm calling it a gift because it is, where they perceive what that is going to entail before they even get there. And we call that being psychic now, because I don't think we fully understand our gift of intuition. Um, and this is something I actually talked about back in 2011. And Dr. Diane Powell does a lot of work in this area. So if you're curious, you can look her up. But there is so much depth that we're not giving credit to that affects their nervous system. So if we're just looking at this presentation of movement from they won't stop moving framework, then we're missing a ton. And when we're missing all of that, we're missing beautiful ways to honor their gift and to support them.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, we've also talked about, having a strengths-based lens for all of this, right? And that's kind of what you're talking about here is, trying to look at what may seem like a problem, right? And really shifting to where is the gift in that, right? Where is the talent in that, or the unique, characteristic in that, that's part of what makes your kid special. And I think it's really important, and that can be hard to do in the heat of the moment, right? Like I am no have not my kid's 20 now, right? I was not great at that always. I'm the first to admit it. It can be very hard. In those moments where you do, right, have the presence of mind, or you can sit back and reflect on a situation, right? Using those opportunities to really look at it differently, right? And try to frame it from the positive side, or from the strength side, or I love this, from the gift side,
Mhm.
because it really is this heightened sensitivity thing, I feel like, is not always talked about or understood enough. And I know from my own experiences as someone who considers myself neurodivergent, right, and raising a child that way, I learned so much that way when I read that, and I think it was in Janara Nuremberg's book, The Divergent Mind. She talked she that's the first time I really heard somebody talk about it from that perspective, that you have this like extra uh, set of antenna, like all these like little, like I think about, I don't know if it's paramecium or whatever, and it's got like all these little, like feelers around it, right? And yours are like extra sensitive, right? And picking up on a lot of things. And I know, like, I have a real sensitivity to noise, and there's a name for that. They call it misophonia, and it helps me, understand it. But I also try to look at the gift in that, right? Like that I have a great memory, auditory, because I hear everything. I really listen when people are talking, because I can assimilate a lot in a conversation, and especially a group conversation, because I can pick up on a lot of things.
Mhm.
But it felt like such a problem, right? And like there was something wrong with me for so long, right? That I really had to shift my own thinking about that. But yeah, I mean, I think I really love making sure, like, spending some time dissecting
Mhm.
this a little bit, so that this idea of heightened sensitivity can kind of become synonymous with
Mhm.
neurodivergence, right? Because it helps us be a lot more
Mhm.
understanding of it, a lot more accepting of it, a lot more supportive around it. And I feel like it's just such an important part of the conversation around
Absolutely.
neurodivergence.
And I love what you were saying about it can be a blessing and a curse, right? So when you look at your child's
Hmm.
the problem side of it, I'm not saying that it's not a problem, because I do appreciate how triggering some of these things can be, particularly if you're a sensitive or neurodivergent parent and we have clashing sensory.
Right. In many
um,
cases, as a parent, they got that from somewhere, and it
oh
could very well
yeah.
be you. So,
um, but also, okay, so that is the quote unquote problem side. What is the gift in this trait?
hmm.
Right. And so how can I help them find the balance and honor this? Right. And I think a big part of this is that compassion piece that you were alluding to. And again, going back to um, being a parent, I mean, it's hard, right?
It
Like
is.
I practice this all the time.
Mhm.
I am also not a perfect parent. It's like I get triggered too. And I think the more that we, and I appreciate there's lots of demands on parents, so please take this with a grain of salt. But the more that we can create little practices for ourselves to anchor into our body and to be in that space where we can acknowledge where really our capacity is, what we're noticing, and what we can release, so that we're in a better space to respond to our children,
Yeah.
it goes a long way. So it's like that's something I do in the morning. I do it a couple times throughout the day and then in the evening. And I've encouraged clients to do that for about 16 years now. And the ones that do practice that notice a huge shift. They're not changing anything with their child. They're practicing just being present in themselves, and the child feels that. We're
Yeah.
designed to co-regulate from utero.
Yep. So
And
talk so spend just a couple minutes talking about that. So what is your practice? What do you do, right, to help you become more attuned in that way? Do you meditate? I mean, is it like what is it?
yeah, well, I mean, I do lots of different things, but you don't need to do everything that I do.
Yeah, I just think it might be
I
helpful for parents, right? To get some,
for
because I
sure.
know if people hear meditate, many people are going to be like, "Oh, I can't meditate. I can't sit still."
Meditating is not about sitting still, first of all. I want to
Yep.
I share that as much as possible. I am also a yoga teacher and everything. Um, Meditation can be done in any which way. You can walk and meditate, you can run, you can swim, you can ski, you can wash dishes, whatever. It's not about sitting still. Meditation, there are two types, first of all, dharana and dhyana. If we look at the yogic approach, one has to do with focused thought. So focusing on a single point, mindfulness, 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 you smell, 2
That's a
touch.
great one, right? To get you very present. Yeah.
And then the last one I do is for that, what do you notice inside? Um, it can be something like an affirmation, something you're just repeating to yourself. And then we're better able to be in that flow state where we're allowing that intuition, body wisdom, source, whatever you want to call it, to flow. But what I do and share with clients is, and we can do it right now if you want.
Sure.
So you're welcome to have your eyes open or closed. If they're open, just noticing or gazing at something still and beginning to bring your awareness to your feet. So maybe that's rocking heel to toe. And then when it feels comfortable, just noticing how it feels to connect your feet to the earth below you. Noticing your toes, the balls of the feet, and the heels. Noticing your left foot and your right foot. Bring your awareness up the legs to your hips and low back. If you're seated, just noticing that support behind you and how it feels to give a little more of your body into that support. So just being held. And so some people like to anchor into their feet. Some people prefer to anchor into their hips and low back. And just noticing the sensations through the lower body. Bring your awareness up through the mid back, upper back, and shoulders, down your arms to your fingertips. Noticing your breath as you inhale, expanding through rib cage and belly. As you exhale, softening through the belly and chest. You're welcome to continue with this flow. Breath not needing to change anything, just allowing your body to do what it knows how to do. Expanding as you inhale and softening as you exhale. And as you continue to breathe, noticing the back of the head, top of the head, the brow, all the little muscles around your eyes, ears, cheeks, and jaw. And just noticing any sensations showing up in the body. Maybe there's thoughts, emotions, and acknowledging them. If it helps to get up and move as you continue to breathe in a way that feels good for you, you're welcome to do so. But just acknowledging those sensations, thoughts, and emotions as you return to your breath. So that's one small example of how I help people to anchor into their body. So you'll notice I invited movement. I invited people to consider and acknowledge their body, emotions, and thoughts. Not send it away, we acknowledge it.
Yeah. And I can see how, just doing that simple practice, right? 3 times a day, how like these are these micro habits, right? That cumulatively really
Mhm.
begin to get you like much more present, in touch, like, whereas so often we're just kind of, very reactive to everything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of that's another important takeaway, right? Is that, the best way to support your child is to support yourself first, right? And I know sometimes we hear that, but I think this was a great way to really embody what that might look like. Yeah, because you hear this, oh, it's kind of like when you get on the plane and they're like, make sure you put your oxygen mask on first, before theirs. But I don't think people always have practical ways to do that. They don't exactly know what to do. So just that simple practice, which only took a few minutes,
Mhm.
is the kind of thing that you can do to really center. And and in doing that, that's also going to help your child because you're not going to be as reactive.
Totally. And so I suggest doing it during calm periods because that's when going back to what we were originally talking about, we need to be in that parasympathetic, that rest, digest, connect to be able to learn and absorb, right? So if the child is always moving or we're in a constantly activated sympathetic state, we're not in a space to learn,
Yeah.
right? The brain is not wired and ready, right? So we do need to discharge the energy first. So coming back to this practice, if you can do it a few times a day during calm moments, you will build that habit so you can drop in during those challenging times and be, I say, anchored in yourself so you can be present and attuned, but you're not taking on that emotion. You can respond.
Yeah.
And that takes practice
It does. Well, and right.
and
And it's
capacity.
not like it's not a destination either. It's a journey, right?
100%. Like I said, I am not perfect at this
Hmm.
either. None of us are. So, compassion.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is a great point to, to maybe bring it back around. So, okay, so as parents, right, this is the kind of stuff that we can do. And, it's one of those things that's maybe simple but not easy, right? But it's literally these small micro habits.
Mhm.
But let's kind of put things into like current perspective. And so a lot of kids have just like they're ending their summer, they're back in school. So now it's the teachers, right, who are dealing with the kids. And the
Mhm.
teachers may not have these same tools or this same understanding. So, as our kids are back in school and they're in these environments where their need for movement may not be quite as tolerated or as accepted, what are some of the ways that parents can partner with teachers to help them understand how to support their child? Because I know this can be really tricky. Like if your kid doesn't have a diagnosis or an accommodation or
Yeah.
certain things, like they may not have these supports baked in. So how can parents work with teachers and try to help everybody pull on the same rope here?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good and kind of a tricky one because it's difficult. You don't want to overstep and you don't want the teacher to have to change their whole learning plan and everything. But a good teacher knows that we need to sort of look at the different learning types, right? So the auditory, the visual, and the kinesthetic, which is what we're talking about here, that movement piece. And for young children in particular, and those with that kinesthetic learning type, that's just part of the learning experience. I'll send you these studies if you want, Julie, and you can maybe put them or post them below. But those also might be interesting to look at. But I think really understanding and communicating with your child's teacher that um, maybe the presentation for when they're nervous, or just even straight up saying they need these movement breaks. Is there any way we could sort of support getting some movement in so that they're in a better space to learn?
Mm-hmm.
And I had this talk with one of my daughter's teachers before we had a diagnosis. And it's interesting because there are lots of teachers who um, they're still teaching from an older framework or paradigm. Um, and I think they're seeing more and more that these children do need movement, and it's nothing against their teaching style, but the way they were taught was maybe outdated, right? And I don't think it was
Mm-hmm.
ever designed, honestly, to serve children. We were trying to fit children into an adult mold that was easy for teachers to work with. Um, but yeah, it's a delicate one, right? It's very delicate, but I think as much as you can, being an advocate for your child so that they also feel safe in their learning space um, is really, really paramount. And I do appreciate again how difficult that can be at some schools and in some states. I'm in Canada. You're in the United States, Julie, and I do know it varies in various areas. So being an advocate, I guess, is really the biggest thing you can do. Know your child, and if you can give your teacher one simple takeaway or ask.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think as parents of neurodivergent kids, this is just the reality of our situation,
Yeah,
right? Like you have to you have to be prepared to advocate for
yeah,
your child and teach them also effective ways to self-advocate, which we don't need to go deep into, but it's both. Because
yeah,
as they get older, they're going to have to do this for themselves as well. But you modeling that in a productive, respectful way
yeah.
is certainly going to help. But yeah, um, and I think, to something we spoke to earlier, I think, we can also educate in a, I mean, not in a pedantic way, but particularly if we make it about our child, maybe that helps, frame it in a way where it's not like we're trying to necessarily, teach the teacher.
Yeah,
But a lot of teachers maybe don't have all of this understanding, right? And I think looking at it from a place of they just don't know what they don't know.
yeah,
So if we can help them understand it, and specifically in the context of our child, that that's the best we can do. And advocating is never easy.
no,
It isn't. It's just kind of part and parcel of of being of being a parent. I feel like you just have to get comfortable with it.
yeah,
But I could also see, maybe some parents thinking, well, but if I'm always accommodating this behavior because I understand my kid and I'm going to make the effort to do that,
mhm,
what about the rest of the world, right? They're not always going to be that way. I mean, I'd love to think that the whole world will catch up with this thinking and we'll just have environments that are more accessible and inclusive all the way around. But there's no guarantee of that, right? And I certainly know we're not there yet.
mhm,
So, what are some ways to maybe help families, think about that, right? That, that supporting their kid is not necessarily going to make it harder for them, to
mhm,
exist in the world. Because I could see how you might be like, well, yeah, I get it, but like, what about when they're out in public? How are we going to deal with it then?
totally. Yeah, and I think you brought up a really good point about helping your child to be an advocate, right? And that's a hugely important part of it. So I'll go back to that example of kindergarten, and just talking to the teacher and using my child as an example, and how one or a couple children who also had similar presentations could quickly derail the class, um, and make it very hard to teach, right? Um, but also then bringing my daughter into the conversation so that collectively we could speak about, okay, so how do we know when this is needed? What are sort of some parameters around this? How are we going to ask for this support? Right? So it starts really early and in obviously developmentally appropriate ways. And I don't say age appropriate for a reason, but
Sure.
I think helping your child to understand their sensory sensitivities, their triggers, and sensory supports. And so when I am feeling overwhelmed, what does that look like, feel like? How is that showing up in my body? And what can I do to support myself? Do I just need to go off somewhere quiet? Is it a stimming practice that helps? Is it connection with a parent or someone else, right? So really, it's really knowing yourself. And that's what I think all my work really centers around, really being able to know and honor and advocate for yourself. Because
Yeah.
we can only create our own safety.
That's right. And I think that's really important advice. To really have these open conversations,
Mhm.
with your child about this stuff, right? So that they, one, can have an acceptance of it and not like
Mhm.
the shame around it, but also so that they learn, how to be able to take care of themselves in these situations because
Yeah.
we can't always be there. So it's such an important skill to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I think, different for many parents from how we were brought up because we were probably shamed for some of these things. So there's that added layer of that kind of a trauma, if you will, and that fear of asking for help. So then being able, or then needing to step into the advocate role for our child, that's another barrier.
Yeah, exactly. Well, right. And right now we're kind of have to deal with, our own trauma, as it were, right?
Yeah.
Right, it can be a lot. So as I think about how we can conclude our
Mm.
conversation, right, in a way where parents feel really empowered by what we've spoken about and hopefully come away, with some takeaways that are really going to help them if they have this kid who's always in motion, right? How they can really start to maybe shift their thinking about that
Mhm.
and feel more empowered around it.
I think there's two. One, that anchoring practice for yourself, right? Any way to anchor in and just acknowledge your own body so you're not feeling overwhelmed. Or when you do, you're able to release it. And then the second one would be to work with your own biology. So that fight, flight, freeze, fawn presentation, again, noticing it so that you can also help your child to do the same. Work with their biology. Can't fight it.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I think this has been such a great conversation. I feel like it's very timely, as we mentioned with back to school and, kids who maybe have had a lot more autonomy to be
Mhm.
able, to move at will and not feel a lot of barriers that way as they go back to school, right? They might be feeling, the pressure of having to be in environments where they can't move as freely. And I just think it's timely from that perspective, but also I really love being able to talk with you about this idea of understanding neurodivergence as a heightened sensitivity thing, and
Mhm.
if we can look at it through that lens, I think that gives us a lot more compassion for ourselves and for our kids.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for being on today. And yeah, I hope to talk to you again soon. I know we've talked about that, so I'd love to do that in the future. But thanks for being here today. I think it'll be really helpful to our listeners.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Exceptional Girls podcast. If you liked today's episode, it would mean the world to me if you'd subscribe, leave a rating and review, and recommend it to just one other person who you think would benefit from listening. Even a small act of support helps the podcast reach more people, which in turn helps increase awareness and understanding of exceptionality in girls. And if you have suggestions for future episodes, please share them. You can connect with me, your host, Julie Withrow, through our website at exceptionalgirlspodcast.com/contact.